Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. For today's video I'm going to be sampling the opening of 5 books that I can currently pick up for nothing on Amazon to see what they're like. I've seen lots of people talking about all the great books you can pick up and read on Kindle Unlimited, and if, like me, you love self-published fantasy, it's an absolutely fantastic resource for you to find new authors and new books to read. But what about people who don't use Kindle Unlimited? So I personally have never used Kindle Unlimited, and at this point in time I don't see myself ever using it because I always have more than enough books to keep me going. But there are plenty of other reasons that people might not want to use or might be unable to use Kindle Unlimited. Are there still books that they can pick up for nothing that are worth their time to read? So where I primarily read epic fantasy, I wanted to see if there were some good epic fantasy books that I could get for nothing without using Kindle Unlimited or Prime Reading, which I don't actually know too much about and what the differences are. But without going into one of those, what could I just get for nothing without it being a book that is just on a special deal where it's free for a week or 2 weeks or something like that. Something that appears to be at least free as the set price point for the book. So first of all, many of the books that I found that I could just rock up and buy for nothing were subgenres that I don't read, things like fantasy romance or urban fantasy. So if you're looking for the type of book that tends to have a shirtless guy, a werewolf, witches, all that jazz on the cover, you can have a really good time with this and certainly find a lot more titles that might suit you than I was able to find for me. Regardless of that though, just searching on Amazon for 3 fantasy books, I was able to find quite a number that looked like they could fit the bill for me, and I went through, I checked out the synopses, I had a look at them on Goodreads, and I was able to narrow the list down to 5 titles that looked and sounded like they could be epic fantasy and like they could be titles that I would enjoy. So some quick caveats before I get started. Number 1, these are all titles that were available for nothing on Amazon UK on the day that I did this kind of little experiment, and there's no telling how long that price point will stay for. It could be that they're not available worldwide, and it could be that the price even on Amazon UK goes up to something else at some point in the future. Obviously I have no control over that. All I can say is that they were free and I was able to buy them if I wanted to for nothing on the day that I read these. Number 2, as I said, I read the synopsis for each of these, and I also had a look on Goodreads and looked at the various shelves that people might have filed them under, and from what I can tell, these are all epic fantasy, or at least have a pretty good chance of coming out as epic fantasy. Obviously when you're looking at what people have shelved them under on Goodreads, you do get a bit of a wide gamut of different shelves, but from what I can tell, these should turn out to be epic fantasy, and from the samples that I read at least, that does appear to have been the case. And number 3, of course, I didn't read the whole book. I only read a portion of the sample that was available using Amazon's Look Inside feature. So obviously I won't be able to comment on the full book. I can only comment on how the book started and form my opinion based on that. So I've got all of the details and covers on my Kindle here in front of me, so I'm going to look down to be able to read synopses and things like that. But the books that I sampled in the order that I did so were The Lone Dragon Knight by D.C. Clemens, which is book 1 of The Dragon Knight, A Dagger in the Winds by Brendan Noble, book 1 of the Frostmarked Chronicles, Rise of the Sparrows by Serena Langer, which is book 1 of The Relics of Arzak, Child of the Flames by D.W. Hawkins, that is book 1 of The Seven Signs, and City of Masks by Ashley Capes, which is book 1 of the Bone Mask Cycle. So straight into the books then, and The Lone Dragon Knight by D.C. Clemens. This one, the cover is not bad, it's not great, but it's one that I don't mind too much. It doesn't really tell me too much, but I don't mind it, it's intriguing enough for me. The synopsis reads, his memories only go as far back to his days slaying starved beasts and madmen in a dark pit. But soon after he's sold to a criminal syndicate, Mercer gains a chance to avenge the life he lost. Along with a vampire and a princess, helping the young rogue take advantage of the opportunity is an enchanted longsword he finds deep within a mountain, whose power links to that of an ancient dragon. If Mercer hopes to achieve retribution against his formidable foes, the corrupted boy must become the kind of warrior not seen in centuries, a dragon knight. So the sample available on Amazon includes a short prologue and a series of short chapters, or at least the first chapter is a short one, because those are the two that I read, the prologue and chapter 1. These are two very different kind of chapters. Essentially, they have no recognisable tie-in between them, but that's not unusual for a prologue. You often will get that, and obviously if I was to read the rest of the book, I would assume that the tie-in between them would become apparent. The prologue of this one is basically a seer describing a vision to a king and queen. It sounds like this is something that's normally done when there's a new royal baby. There is a young princess there, and it sounds like the seer has basically looked into the future to see what sort of person this princess is going to be, or at least to see a particular snapshot into her future. And she's describing that to the king and queen. For me, this didn't really work as an opening chapter or prologue that I particularly liked. The idea of it isn't too bad, but the execution didn't work for me. The vision that the seer has kind of reads as narrative rather than dialogue, so she's telling them what happened, but the descriptive language that she uses doesn't really sound natural coming from somebody talking. It's something that you would maybe read aloud from a book, but not something that you would just say for yourself when you're recounting a dream, a vision, a memory, or anything along those lines. It just didn't quite work for me. The vision itself does give us a little bit of detail as to what we might see later in the book, I guess. You've got the princess as a young woman. I don't think age is really specified, but she's certainly grown, and she's got some sort of magic, and there appears to be a dragon wreaking havoc all around her. So that certainly does sound interesting and intrigues me for later on in the book at least. Then we move on to the first chapter, and this one is, as I say, a clean break, so it's nothing to do with the prologue. We're dealing with a character who is a prisoner in a pit, basically, and is brought out on various occasions to fight in an arena. There's mention of, I think it's described as a serrated whip, kind of wrapped around his arm. It doesn't appear to be something that ever unwraps. It's something that's a permanent fixture of his arm. He can use it as a weapon. He talks about people, or certainly beasts, biting down on it, but it doesn't seem to do anything more than that, at least in the memories that he's retelling us at the start. So here he's basically saying that he's in his kind of cell in the pit, he's given food and water, and then he's rolled out, fights, and then he goes back in again, and he's fighting various beasts and occasionally other people as well. And that's kind of all that you get from the opening chapter, really. So again, like the prologue, it doesn't really do anything for me. The prologue at least gives me something that I can get my teeth into with this vision, but the opening chapter doesn't really do much for me at all. The prologue as well is in third person, and the opening chapter is in first person, so you've got two different styles there. I'm not sure obviously how that will translate throughout the book, whether the rest of the book is all in the first person or whether it does change around, but essentially you've got the two different styles there, but neither of them actually worked for me, so this book, as far as I'm concerned, would be a no. Book 2 then is A Dagger in the Winds by Brendan Noble. This one, I think the cover of it is a bit more of a YA sort of style, just in the artwork if nothing else, but it's another one that I don't really mind. It looks pretty cool. The story itself has Slavic inspirations, which is one thing when you're reading it, but when you're a native English speaker and you're reading aloud, it's an absolute nightmare, because I hate the idea of offending anyone with my mispronunciations, but this is something that I've brought upon myself. On the plus side though, as far as that goes, the sample that you do have available does have a pronunciation guide for the major characters, so that's good, and it's also got some diagrams, some pictures of the kind of the runes of the major gods in this world, so you do get a couple of little kind of freebies in the sample as well. The synopsis for this one says, an outcast cursed since birth, a witch chosen by a goddess, torn apart by fate, together can they save their tribe from an eternal winter. All Vatswav has ever dreamed of is belonging and purpose, except he's never actually dreamed. Each night his soul leaves his body, allowing him to wander invisibly until he wakes. He'll do anything to know why. Even give a blood offering to the goddess of winter and death. As a priestess of spring, there's no one Atelia hates more than the winter goddess, except maybe her once best friend, Vatswav. It's been 4 years since she saved Vatswav's life using forbidden magic. Her thanks, abandonment. Winter stole her mother just weeks later, and Vatswav never came. But when Atelia discovers Vatswav bearing the winter goddess's mark on what should be the first day of spring, she realises the horrific truth. Winter will not end, and Vatswav is her only hope of discovering why. Embark on an epic journey through a world rooted in Slavic mythology and folklore that has powerful gods, menacing beasts, cursed forests, forbidden romance, and plenty of secrets to uncover. So the prologue of this one is set when the two characters are 12 years old, and I think more than anything, this one is an introduction to their powers rather than really an introduction to the characters themselves. So we see this kind of mysterious sleep that the main character has, and then you also see the described bit where Atelia saves him using her own power. So you get to see that, you get to see a bit of the world as well. They talk about some of the gods and some of the folklore and things like that. So you get a bit of an idea of what they're about and what kind of thing you might expect to hear more about later on in the book. The next chapter, although I didn't read it, it does start with kind of a 4 years later, so that's in the synopsis as well. So the main book, by the sounds of it, you've got these two characters who are going to be 16 years or so. I don't know if there are further time jumps later on or if they stay at that age, but they're going to be 16 by the looks of it, at least at the start of the book. I thought the writing with this one was pretty good and the story was compelling enough, so it's one that I would definitely consider reading more of. Book 3 is Rise of the Sparrows by Serena Langer, and this is another one that was a prologue and then a first chapter that I read both of. The cover of this one is one that doesn't really have too much going for it. It's, again, one that I don't really mind. I quite like the sword that you've got here, and the title stands out as a title should, so I like that. There's no ambiguity over the author name and the title or anything along those lines. I like as well that it's more than just a plain black background. You've got the kind of the smoke in there as well, so it does work despite its simplicity, and I like when a book can do that. It's a bit like Illborn by Daniel T. Jackson. You've got a sword and a black background, but this one you've got a bit more. You've got the little swirl in Illborn, but this one you've got the smoke, and it just works a little bit better for me. So the synopsis of this one, a cursed omen who dreams of death, a girl who calls fire with a wish, a group of resistance fighters who need the king to die. Prophecy has brought them all together, but will it destroy them too? As a homeless orphan, shunned for having the gift, Rachel knows how to survive. The visions of people dying are only hers to see. The shadows are her safety. When Sephi comes into her life, having a friend who is as feared by the villagers as Rachel seems too good to be true. After a fiery incident, the villagers call on the White God to execute Rachel and Sephi. Together they flee into a world they know nothing about. In the unknown await a mist woman, a prophecy, and a young rebel who sounds sincere, but in Rachel's experience no one ever is. The Sparrows, fighters of the resistance, believe in her because a prophecy names her, but can she be the leader they need when she can't control her own magic? Rachel knows the struggles the gifted endure all too well. Perhaps it's time she stopped hiding and fought back. So this is another one where the prologue and the opening chapter have no visible link early on in the book, but presumably once more they do as the book progresses. But I'm quite glad that I read both because I got more out of chapter 1 than I did the prologue. So the prologue starts with some sort of mysterious temple, and you've got a woman who enters the temple to sacrifice a group of people who are essentially bred for that purpose. And the purpose of the sacrifice is to unleash a Dark Lord and basically destroy the world. From what I get from this, and then moving on to the first chapter, which is completely different in setting, characters and tone, I kind of get the impression that this is to introduce us to the big bad before we then move on to the kind of normal people who are going to be affected by and try to stop it. So within that first chapter, we're introduced to Rachel, and first of all, I hate that type of name in a fantasy because it just sounds too normal for me. But the character herself seems okay. She's introduced as someone who's quite able. She's kind of a homeless urchin. She can look after herself, though, as is demonstrated when two men set upon her, and she's able to quite easily actually fend them off and then go off looking for somewhere else to find shelter. The reason that she is shunned is this gift that she has. She can see essentially visions, and initially she started out trying to use those visions to help people. So she saw some people die, she tried to warn them, and then she was obviously ignored. And when those people did die, others then came to her thinking that she was a witch, I guess, and trying to blame her for their deaths. So she then goes into hiding and resurfaces when things have cooled down a bit, basically. But she learns from that to keep her visions to herself because people aren't interested and they distrust, I guess, what they don't know. So I thought with the two combined, although the prologue didn't really do too much for me, I did quite appreciate the opening chapter. I thought it's one that, with the writing style and the story combined, it's one that I probably could enjoy reading more of. Book 4 is Child of the Flames by D.W. Hawkins. This is a cover that I actually quite like. I like the design of it. I'm not normally a fan of the type of cover where the artwork and the title overlap, but I think it's done quite well here. There are 4 or 5, I think, different covers on Goodreads, but it looks like this one is the current or new one. But it's probably, out of the 5 books that I've selected here, I think this one is probably my favourite of the covers. The synopsis reads, in fire some things are destroyed, others are forged. The men of the Galanian Empire came with the dawn, bringing swords and hunger. Seeking an ancient relic, they slaughtered Shauna Lewin's family, they burned her life to the ground. But blades are born of fire and tempered by its embrace. Shauna Lewin is such a blade, carrying her mother's heirloom, the very relic for which her family was killed. She sets out on a quest, driving to the heart of a conspiracy that could plunge the entire world into darkness. She is wrath, she is a blade pointed at the throat of her enemies. She is the child of the flames. So this is the one out of the 5 titles that I didn't actually finish reading the opening chapter of. That's not because I didn't like it, because actually I really did enjoy it to the point that I bought the 3 copy that was available. It's just that the opening chapter is so long. I got to a scene change, the first scene change in the book, and I skimmed ahead a little bit because I had been reading for quite a while. I wanted to see how much longer to go to the end of a chapter. And chapter 1 is so long that it doesn't all fit in the free sample on Amazon's Look Inside. When I looked at it on my Kindle app on the PC, it was about 40 pages before you get to the end of that first chapter. So the chapter starts out with Shauna and her father tied to chairs in their kitchen. So you've already got the bit where the Galanian Empire has arrived and they've taken them prisoner, and they're beating her father to get the location of this heirloom, and she is basically there tied to a chair watching this happen. They get left alone and her father tells her basically to get the heirloom and flee, otherwise their family would have died for nothing. So plot devices then lead to Shauna being untied and she's able to fight back, and we learn that she is more than a bit handy with a sword, or more specifically I guess with the 2 magic imbued swords that she has. And it's quite an action-packed opening actually, and obviously there's quite a lot of the opening chapter to fit action into, but I think there's a really good job of that actually. It really sets the scene, and I like an opening where there's a good bit of action to it, and this one definitely delivers on that front. Despite the chapter length and me normally liking relatively short chapters that I can make sure that I get to the end of within a reading session, no matter how many chapters I'm reading in that session, I still quite liked this one. I didn't at any point feel like this chapter's dragging on, so it's definitely a good opening, and it's one that I'm looking forward actually to continuing with at some point. So then we go on to book 5, City of Masks by Ashley Capes. This is another pretty cool cover. I don't mind this one. I think it is one that does look better up close than it does from a distance. I think it's got a certain kind of style to it that could be mistaken from a distance, but up close I do quite appreciate this one. The synopsis reads, when a royal conspiracy topples the noble house Falco, Sophia must take up a burden of her father's mantle and assume guardianship of his great mask. Yet the sentient bone mask, powerful enough to compel those around her, will not speak, and Sophia, the first female protector in 100 years, is left defenceless. Hunted by the king, she is driven from the palace and must fight for survival alone in the streets of Anaskar. There she crosses paths with Notch, a bitter mercenary with problems of his own. Accused of murder, Notch is trying to clear his name while hunted by the city's robed assassins, the very people who are now searching for Sophia. To take back their city and cast down the tyrant on the throne, Sophia and Notch must face the blades of Anaskar's assassins The rage of a mighty sea beast, and the mysterious Lupo, a man with a great mask of his own, who has masterminded vicious terrorist attacks on a city that spurned him. Their struggle threatens to tear the city and the kingdom into shreds. So with this one, we go straight into chapter 1, and we are behind bars with Notch. He's been accused of a crime that he didn't commit, or he says he didn't commit. We don't have anything but his word on this, but he's our main character, he's our point of view, so we assume that he is therefore correct. He's got a talkative companion with him, and we learn a little bit about the world, I guess, from that, from the interactions that they have, and from the kind of scrawlings on the wall that this companion is reading out for something to do, I guess, to pass the time. They are visited by a god who has a noblewoman with her daughter, because the daughter has seen Notch. She's there to identify him because she saw him standing over the body of this murder victim, I guess. So that's kind of all of the info that you really get from the opening chapter. We don't learn too much more than that. The writing in the chapter is okay. There's no issues with it whatsoever. The overall kind of theme to it, I guess, the setting and what we do learn is intriguing enough. So again, although it doesn't really tell me much, it's another one that I could probably be happy enough reading at least a little bit more of. So I randomly read the opening of 5 epic fantasies that you can get for nothing on Amazon UK at the moment without using Kindle Unlimited or Prime Reading, and overall it was a pretty good experience for me. With just the opening chapter or chapter and prologue, whatever it was, of these 5 books, I would say that if I had more time and if I had fewer titles on my reading list, I would probably be happy to continue with 4 out of the 5 titles that I read here. So for this video and a few times previously, I've made good use of the Look Inside feature on Amazon to read the opening chapter or chapters of books, and it's a really great resource that I highly recommend, especially if you're unsure about starting a book from an author that you've never read before. Even if a book is available for free, you can still sample it before you pick it up and see if it's one that you think is going to work for you. So that's all I've got for you on these 5 anyway. Do the usual liking and subscribing stuff. Leave me a comment down below though if you've read any of these titles, or if you're intrigued enough to go and check out any of them for yourself. Let me know which one of these takes your fancy the most. I'll leave Goodreads links to all of these books down below. With those, wherever you are in the world, you can find the links to your local purchase sites if you want to go and check out these books for yourself. Also down there, of course, you'll find all of my social media links where you can connect with me on Twitter, Instagram and Goodreads. You'll also find links to my book club Discord and to my Patreon. Come and join in the conversation if you want to. We'd be happy to have you along. That's everything I've got for you today. I hope you appreciated this video. Join me on the next one sometime soon, but until then, as always, take care of yourselves, read some good books. Bye for now.